Lord Jesus Christ.
There's the old phrase, you may have heard it or seen it on a bumper sticker, of what would Jesus do? Well, golly, after we heard this gospel today, it seems that getting angry and flipping tables would definitely be among the options. I don't recommend it, though. You see, there's a reason he got angry. And the way to understand this, I think maybe we could go back in time and remind ourselves that when these words were written, particularly the words of the first reading, about 4,000 years ago, paper didn't exist. So for someone to write something down, you were writing on parchment, and parchment was very, very costly. You know the scrolls that you've seen? This is what they wrote these words upon. And so for someone to write something in thorough detail, to use maybe more words than what is necessary, indicates to us, because of how expensive it was, that this is important. This is very, very meaningful. So if you go back and recall the words from Exodus, these words of the Ten Commandments, remind yourselves that the first commandment is by far the longest. The first commandment that says, I am the Lord your God. I brought you out of Egypt, the place of your slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. Do not carve idols for yourselves. Do not have any form of image in which you worship or bow down. Do not worship any false god of the sky, of the earth, of the sea. I am the Lord your God. I am a jealous God. I want you to love and worship me above anything else in your life. Worship no other God but me. Think about it. And I didn't even read the whole thing. Think about how lengthy this one single commandment is. It's almost as long as all of the other commandments put together. Think about it. Thou shalt not kill. 4 words. Thou shalt not commit adultery. 5 words. Thou shalt not steal. We're back down to 4 words. You see, the reality is this. For the author of these words, Moses himself, receiving the 10 Commandments and then writing them down, for the author to make the point that the first commandment was so lengthy, so important, that it tells us that by far the first commandment is the most important of our entire moral life. The best way to understand this is to realize that every commandment that comes after the first 2 through 10 is a commentary and an explanation of number 1. And so as we wrestle with making sure we have no false gods, we hear things like, do not kill. And so what we realize is if we make rage and vengeance the most important thing in our life, such that we would consider taking another's life, that's a false idol. If we love dishonesty or some other thing to the point where we would bear false witnesses or we would lie, that has become a false idol. So often we think of idolatry as just simply one of the 10 Commandments, one of the sins among many that we may find ourselves committing, when in fact it's the other way around. All sin, according to this 10 Commandments list, all sin is a form of idolatry. The moment where we love or value or worship anything as more important than God, that's the moment that we sin. The moment we love pleasure or possessions more than God is the moment we covet our neighbor's wife, our neighbor's possessions. The moment where we love our work and our profession more than God is the moment where we do not take a day of rest. The moment where that work and profession has become become our God. And so you see, the whole point of the 2 through 10 is a commentary on number 1, a guide, a direction, a set of instructions that helps us avoid that singular sin of idolatry. And so to understand why Jesus got as angry as he did when he entered the temple is to realize that Jesus sees and confronts a display of idolatry. Think back for a minute. Do you remember Judas Iscariot, who betrayed Jesus? He was an Iscariot. That was a political party at the time of Jesus that had this goal of raising up an army to fight the Romans and get the Romans out of Palestine. You remember Barabbas, who was traded for Jesus when Jesus was crucified on that Friday afternoon? Barabbas was a revolutionary and a murderer who had already killed Romans trying to work towards this violent goal. Barabbas was also an Iscariot. And so when Jesus goes in the temple and he sees the marketplace, he sees the buying and selling, he sees the trading and the money changing, it's not just the sin of loving money. He actually sees what everybody in the town would have known, that was a money laundering operation. That the religious leaders in the temple, the religious leaders of Jesus' day, were in love with power and bloodlust. They longed to regain control. They loved money. They loved the idea of their own army. And so this whole marketplace was an effort to launder money, to funnel backroom accounts so that they could pay for an army. Do you remember the silver that Judas Iscariot was given to betray Jesus? It came from that marketplace. And so that marketplace was, instead of the outer edge of the temple, a temple designed to worship the one true God, the temple had been turned into this false idol of funding war, weapons, violence, and political power, rather than the worship of the one true God. And so Jesus goes in and will tolerate it no longer. And he confronts all of the false idols in that marketplace. And to make his point, after having turned over the tables, after having expelled those selling and buying, after having spilled the coins of the money changers, casting out the animals, the leaders of the temple are angry and say, "What sign? By what authority do you do this?" they say. And Jesus replaces the false idol with an image of the true God. He's so disgusted at what's going on, he says, "Tear it down. Take down this false temple. You have corrupted it. You have turned it into an idol. Tear down this temple and I will replace it. I will raise it up in 3 days." He replaces the temple, which formerly was the location of the worship of the one true God, with himself. No longer is he talking about bricks, wood, and stone. Now he's talking about his very body, blood, soul, and divinity. Tear it down, he says, and I'll replace it with myself. I will raise it up in 3 days. I will give back to you the image of the one true God, the one true God who has come in your midst, though you recognize him not, the one true God that I long for you to worship above all things, the God who willingly gives his life for love of you. Tear it down. Remove all false idols from your life, whatever they may be, and worship me alone. And so St. Paul, knowing full well the wisdom of this, he reminds us in the second reading that this world, the world in which we live, doesn't understand this. Do you remember they they ask Jesus for a sign to show his authority. And so Paul says, Jews demand signs and Greeks look for wisdom. But we proclaim Christ crucified. We proclaim the one true God who gives of himself as a holy sacrifice, as the authentic image of God on earth, the image which we worship alone. This is what Lent is supposed to be about. This is why we discipline ourselves to figure out what are those things which we are attached to, those small or large false idols in our lives. By our prayer, our fasting, and our almsgiving, what are those things we figure out that we're attached to, that become for us temptations to idolatry? And as we give ourselves to the discipline and the work of Lent, we discover and we learn a new way, and we dedicate ourselves yet again to the practice and the effort of the worship of the one true God, Jesus Christ, crucified for us, risen from the dead. This is the one true God. Our effort at Lent is to cast out of our lives all idols and to learn yet again how to worship him alone. Jesus Christ, the one Lord, the true God.